Well, here we are at the penultimate episode of season 1 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And I'm a bit sad. I really am. I'm going to miss this show. This is really my first kind of foray into like high fantasy D&D style. And I like it. I do. I like it a lot. I find there's a lot of options with it, obviously, and I think you all kind of know that. You can kind of go as highbrow or as simplistic as you want to with the magic creation and the class systems and all of that. And I feel like Frieren is kind of a, for me, in my opinion, it's a very accessible kind of gateway anime into series that could explore that in more depths. Because I know there's a lot of series out there that do that and do it to a higher extent. And I feel like Frieren is not only accessible in that a general audience can really get into it and get engaged and enjoy it, but I also feel like it's clever enough and it's smart enough in its writing and it has enough depth and character development that it's not just a simple anime to get you into the series or into that genre. It's something that can stand on its own as being high quality, right? So, with that being said, I am really sad that this is like the last episode. And my dogs are ridiculous today, so excuse them. But I've got some comments before we start. I'm really sad that this is the penultimate episode. I am going to watch, obviously, episode 28 next week. And then, as far as the manga and stuff goes, I just don't have this toy. I just don't have time to read the manga right now. I'm doing 7 to 8 shows a week. I work on top of that, and I like to sleep. So I just don't have time for the manga. And plus, I have a feeling they're going to do season 2. I mean, I feel like this series was popular enough. They're going to do season 2. So I'm, like I do with Jujutsu Kaisen, like I do with a couple other series, I'm willing to wait for the high quality anime and to see it and do that. So, with that being said, if there are anything with like manga panels that you all want to show me in the Discord for season 1, I'm cool with seeing the manga panels because I probably won't get to the manga before season 2. The one thing is, I'm kind of weird about when people are like, this is what was left out of the anime from the manga. And I'm only weird about that because I have watched some shows where they've taken stuff that was left out of like the first season and put it into season 2. And that sounds weird. And you're like, what? But sometimes they do it. And I'm like, So if it wasn't shown in season 1 and it's in the manga, I don't necessarily want to see that just in case. But if there are panels from season 1 that you want to do like a side-by-side comparison or show me what they look like, then sure, that seems relative. But otherwise, I'm going to be really excited to see season 2 when it comes out. I'm going to be really, really hyped for it. So hopefully it won't be like 20 seasons like all coming out at once and I'll be like, I've got to suspend everything else till these shows are over, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I do have a couple comments I want to talk about before we start this episode. Ogami 7661 talked about how the red medals that Frieren found in the dungeon in these last couple episodes are an Easter egg and a reference to the Dragon Quest RPG where Heaven's coins are found in dungeons. And I know a little bit about Dragon Quest only because my brother is a gamer and he loves Dragon Quest. So he's played that a lot and he's shown me clips from it. So I do know what you're talking about. And that's a cool reference. So thank you, Ogami. Druidic Dwarf notes that Air could not envision the street smarts and techniques that Verbal used to fight, so that's why she was a bad matchup. And I was like, oh, that's so cool, because she did comment to Fern back previously that she didn't think that Verbal was someone that she could beat, so she can't envision it. So that's really cool. I liked that a lot. Also, I think that it's interesting that it kind of is a foreshadowing for Sinza versus Ubel. It's kind of like a little foreshadowing of that if you can't envision beating somebody, you're not going to. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then finally, Christopher Peterson pointed out that Spiegel means mirror in German, but also talked about Ubel's replica. And I thought this was something that was, even though we're past the replicas at this point, we've just beaten the dungeon. We last left off with Frieren and a mimic, of course. I thought this was pretty interesting to note because Christopher Peterson was questioning why Ubel's replica seemed to have a little bit of personality. Because they're not supposed to, right? They're just supposed to be the power and the mana and be mindless. My thing is, I feel like it wasn't necessarily that it had Ubel's personality, and I told them this in their comment when I replied to it, but Ubel's whole thing is that they steal powers by empathizing with the person they're stealing from. That's like her whole thing. That's why poor Land is locked in a spy family-esque relationship with her at the moment. But what I thought was interesting about that is because she has to empathize with that person, you have to have humanity to empathize with people. So if the replica doesn't have the humanity, just the mana and the abilities, it almost felt like the replica of Ubel was kind of like an NPC that was like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's like a glitch in the system. The NPC has no clue what to do. It's like, I can't steal powers because I can't empathize. All I can use is this one technique, and I don't know what else to do. So I think that's why it was hesitant when it was like hanging out, waiting for Ubel to make a move, because it didn't know what to do. It was just like, it just felt like a sim hitting the wall. And I think that's really interesting about Ubel's character, is that she's not someone that you can just kind of copy moves from, because she's a copier herself. And I was like, So I thought that was really interesting. I love Ubel's character. She's one of my favorites. I really love that my top characters of the top 5, 3 of them are women. I'm like, I don't know a shonen series since I don't know when that in my top 5, the majority have been female characters. So kudos, Frieren, which Frieren's written by a woman, I'm pretty sure. So kudos. Good work. I will say that my other favorites are, did we talk about this? Because I thought it was, Ison was in my top, or definitely Stark. Stark's up there. And who was the other one? Oh my God, Denken and Ison. I'm getting them confused today. I need to drink more coffee. Daddy Denken and Stark are my favorite. Ison's up there, but I feel like Daddy Denken is like, did you want more with Ison, but a little bit different? And here we are. So yes, my dogs are going to be annoying because they want me to play, even though we've played all morning. Hashtag dog mom life. But I'm really excited. Thank you all so much. I can't believe we're at the penultimate episode, but we got one more next week to do. So chop chop. In any case, we're going to start episode 27 of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. I think the aspect that I love most about Frieren is the fact that the show asks you to trust it, to be like, oh, don't worry, trust and believe, we'll get through this. And then it doesn't let you down. Because whenever we first found out that Serie was going to be the proctor, I was like, oh shit, she's going to fail all of them. But the whole thing with Fern, oh my God. And the whole thing with Frieren and the Himmel backstory and this show about making me cry again, I just, You walk into this episode being like, oh, by the time they announce that it's just going to be an interview, you're like, oh, this is just going to be a very simple, weird, anticlimactic ending to the season. But no, the show is like, no, trust us, trust and believe. We're going to get to the nitty gritty. And I'm like, oh my God. So, and the thing about it is it does so, Serie's like, I'm not just going to kill these mages that don't deserve to be here. They could do like Richter and get stronger, and that'll be fine. But I'm not going to pass them either and then run the risk of them. She's like, they're not ready. Some of them aren't ready, and we're going to talk about this whole thing. But, so we're basically going to have a chart up here, because I feel like White Coon needed to come out about our pass-fail rate, and who has passed, who has failed, and who the remaining ones, what I think is going to happen with them. I feel like by next episode, we're going to find out who passed and who failed. So this will be horribly outdated in a week. But we might as well go from there. So let's just go ahead and go through this episode and just see what we get. I don't know the point of the old man with Stark. I feel like there's a point to it. I can't decide if, one, it's a running joke that Stark's just, been entertaining this man that possibly has dementia for the last how many months? Don't know. 2, if it's a subtle commentary that Stark is like peak right now and is a lot stronger than he realizes, and the old man's like, you don't know how strong you are. If it's that, or if it's the fact that this old man has been watching and testing Stark, and we're not going to find out the results of that until either next episode or season 2. I don't know. It could be either way. It could be a joke. It could be whatever. It could just be a running, simple gag that the mangaka's like, isn't this funny? And we're like, yes. And then just go from there. Although, I want to make note, Stark and Fern are a power couple. A power couple. To end all power couples. Like, I feel like Stark and Fern are living out what Frieren and Himmel would have been. I feel like that's the case. I feel like Himmel and Frieren are our doomed pair that were never meant to be, sadly, but Stark and Fern get to be the actualized human versions of that, which I'm fine with. And I feel like that's why Frieren supports them so much, because she sees herself and Himmel in the two of them, but it's just so sad. It makes me so sad for Frieren and Himmel, especially after this episode, which we'll get into. But Fern just being grumpy. Oh, bless Fern. Oh, bless Fern. I think the only part of the OP we haven't talked about is the old man with the staff in front of his face. Maybe we'll get that next week. We'll see. But what I like about, Cyan has taught them well as he left them. I know, guys. Cyan has taught them well, because I feel like the three of them do a really good job of kind of talking each other down and talking with each other and communicating, like, when they do have arguments. Like Stark saying, like, hey, Frieren's probably got on your nerves right now, but she's not totally in the wrong. You just need to calm down. And it's so funny for him to tell Fern to calm down, because Fern's like the calmest grump ever. She's just like, I'm just mad. And he's like, calm down. But they're practically a married couple at this point. So yeah, this test was the final one, and the whole thing about her staff, and I feel like Frieren, when she tries to surprise people, I don't know, I can't tell. Part of me thinks that originally Frieren was like, no, it can't be fixed, just let it go, and then she saw how upset Fern was, and kind of changed her mind and was like, fine, I'll try to help get it fixed because this means a lot to her. Or if it wasn't that, it could be that Frieren had always intended to get it repaired. She just wanted to make it a surprise for Fern, but Frieren's not very good socially at masking surprises, so her go-to is just kind of like to make her mad, and then she was like, I'll go fix it while she's off huffing and puffing. I can't decide which it is. I can't decide if Frieren always intended it to be a surprise to get the staff fixed, or if she really didn't want to fix the staff but then saw how much it meant to Fern and then decided to fix it. I don't know. I can't decide which one it is. Either way, the fact remains that she did fix the staff for Fern because it meant so much to her. And Fern realizes that Frieren does care. She does show her compassion. She just does it in kind of a little bit of a socially awkward, unique way, which is fine. The intent is there. And I thought at first this show was going to try to make me cry with Hyder showing back up and us getting the flashback of him, but no, they were saving that emotion draining moment till later. But yeah, so Stark, I love that he's always there. Stark is such a great character because he's, a typical teenage guy, but he also is patient and calm, and he can see how upset she is, and he's like, yeah, I know you're upset, but here's some things to think about. And he tries to like talk her through it, and he doesn't mock her or get mad at her or like call her out for being upset for no reason. He believes that her feelings are valid, and he's like, yeah, you feel this way, but maybe let's try looking at it from this angle. And I think that's really sweet. I think that's really sweet of him. And I feel like that pairing of Stark and Fern and showing how they help each other communicate and work through it is directly paired in the next scene with Lavine and Kinney, which just furthers the validity of that ship and the canonness of that ship alongside Stark and Fern. If you're shipping Stark and Fern, you should probably be shipping Kinney and Lavine because they're basically functioning under similar dynamics, right? So what's so fascinating to me is also how characters in this series conceptualize time, because depending on the character and their circumstance, 3 years, like Kinney says, wow, 3 years is a long time. To her, she's young, it seems like a long time. To Frieren, it's over. 3 years is nothing, right? And then you have, compared Richter and Denken, Richter thinking that 3 years, is enough time to get strong. It's plenty of time. Whereas for Denken, 3 years is not enough time at all. He could die by then. So I love that this series plays around with the concept of time, and depending on the character, depending on their age, and depending on their circumstance, how they view that 3-year gap, whether it's long or short, or enough time to get stronger or not enough time to make it, is fascinating to me. And I like that we get that kind of expressed throughout the episode. But yeah, the Lavigne must be very, very sad, because for her to willingly go over and accept head pats, yeah, she's really in rough shape. But it's really sweet that she, gets the head pat from Kinney. It's cute, and I like that Frieren kind of looks over like, "Am I bothering you too? Am I interrupting a moment?" But yeah, she's on a mission with her little bag of Fern staff to go to Richter's shop, and Richter's character has grown on me so much since his battle with Lavigne and Kinney. He's grown on me a lot as a character. I think Richter is an insolent youngster, as Denken calls him, but he's very fascinating to me because I think he's very I want to phrase this right. If I'm going to make a comparison that he reminds me of, he reminds me in a way to, and you're gonna have to excuse me, I won't try to get too much into spoilers. He reminds me of Flock from Attack on Titan, in the sense, not entirely, but he reminds me of Flock from Attack on Titan in the sense that he is a very relatable and understandable character. He's not exactly aligning with what would normally be considered to be the right thing to do. He's more pragmatic and more, this is what needs to happen, whether it's right or wrong. And he very much waits to see what is going to be most beneficial for him before he makes that decision. And that's what reminds me of that character. Although I will say I like Richter a lot more than I like Flock. But that kind of pragmaticism and the kind of like, I'm going to go with whatever is the right decision for me, kind of reminds me of that with him. I love his dynamic with Denken, and I'm going to be really sad. Maybe, I guess we might as well talk about this, because we know Richter has failed. We know over here that Lavigne, she had already failed, and Richter had already failed. We knew about that. We knew Edel and Stargirl, they had already failed as well, and the lone guy. What's interesting to me is that we didn't get much on these two, Stargirl and lone guy. He just, like, the last episode, he just popped in, and we don't know anything about him at this point. I'm like, are we going to get any more on him next episode? Or is he going to pop in and be important when we get to season 2? I don't know. But so we had those, they all failed the test. And then in our fail, we also have Laufin, who has failed as well. And I'm going to put Denken down here for now. We're also going to put Frieren on here for fail. Fern for pass, and we'll talk about them when we get to them. And Kinney, they failed as well. And Dunst. Scharf failed. And then so did, Air, she failed too. So yeah, we basically have, let me put it down here, Verbal and Methode. And anybody else? Oh, we know that the one guy, One Punch Man, what was his name? His name is B, aka One Punch Man. He failed too. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Oh, and then we have Ubel and Land. Oh, we got to find out about these 5. These are the 5 I'm probably most interested in to see what's going to happen with them. So, okay. All right. Interesting. We'll talk about them here in a hot second. But I like that Richter's just like, why are you here? Why are you wasting my time? Why are you ignoring me? And Denken's like, he's like, I failed the test. There's nothing keeping us together. I will say, the lamp that's in his shop reminds me of Ramiel from Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I kind of want it. I kind of want that lamp. I feel like Denken is visiting his shop not to buy anything. He's like he's like me. When I go shopping, I like peruse for hours and buy nothing. People that are working on commission hate me because they're like, don't you want this? And I'm like, no. I'm like a salesman's nightmare. I am either horribly indecisive or I am like, I don't want to talk to people that work there for sales. I hate it. I'm like, just let me get my stuff and get out. So I would probably do like Denken and just shop around and be like, I'll look this up later and then leave. But I feel that Denken went there just to try to make Richter feel better. I feel like he was just checking in on him, being like, hey, it's okay. Because I'm sure that Denken has failed this test before at some point. So he was probably like, hey, it's going to be okay. What's interesting is that we don't get to find out why Laufin is with Denken. Richter asks her, and we don't get to hear the response. I was like, oh, how dare you not tell us, show? So that's something that's clearly being kept for season 2. We're not finding that out yet. I'm like, oh, how dare. I thought that was incredible. So yeah. And then I like that Denken's kind of like, look, it could happen to anybody. It is just strictly luck that it was you and not Kine or Laufin or anybody else. And Richter's like, well, a loss is a loss, and I wasn't strong enough to defend myself, so... I get why Richter is working today, because Denken kind of calls him out. He's like, well, why are you at work? And I'm like, you know, if you're grieving or if you're having a bad day, sometimes you need a distraction. So sometimes going to work in the weirdest way can be a distraction. Like some days I've had like bad days at home or bad days with like family or friends, and I'm like, I just need to distract myself and like get my mind off of it. So I'll go to work and then be like chugging away, and then I'll have time to kind of process it later. So interesting. And he's like, well, the exam's held every 3 years. And the moment that Richter was like, oh, well, for an old man like you, 3 years may not be long enough. And Denken's like, yeah. And I was like, oh shit. No, Denken's like, you're right. You're young. Like you say you're middle-aged, but you got lots of time. I don't. And I was like, oh shit. So I'm worried that Denken isn't going to pass. And that's going to be like the hard lesson of it. So I guess I'm going to have a maybe category. And I'm going to put Denken over in the maybe. Because I honestly don't know. I feel like Denken can picture himself as a first-class mage. But I also don't see Denken being a student of Serie at all. Because Serie doesn't really respect humans at all. Serie doesn't respect them. She's just like above it. The only one she seems to have respected was Flom and Fern, who she's like, oh, you're actually interesting. I would have you as a student. So I feel like even if Denken can envision himself as a first-class mage, I don't know if Serie would take him on as a student, because she like was a little bit disrespectful of the one old man. So I don't know if she would want another, but I could also see it's all about her intuition. And if she says you're worthy of being a first-class mage, she'll let you be a first-class mage. So if she sees Denken as being acceptable to be a first-class mage, she'll let him pass. And honestly, if we're being real, Denken probably would have been one that would have gotten past. Do I think that Air and Kine would have gotten past on their own, or Dunst? No. Or Sharf? No. Frieren would, but we'll talk about Frieren and her and Serie. Oh my god. But yeah, I don't know if Kine, Dunst, Sharf, or Air or Laufin would have gotten by on their own. So her failing them right off the bat, yeah, it's fine. My thing is, though, if Laufin has failed, she has this relationship with Denken. So is her failing going to mean that he fails too? And is he going to go back to the shop with her to see Richter and be like, hey, I failed. Laufin failed. You want to practice with us for the next 3 years and get strong enough to take the test again? I could see that. And then Richter would be like, but you said you might die in 3 years. And he's like, well, make sure that I live. That might end up happening. Denken is a big question mark for me. I want him to pass. But I also, if Laufin hasn't passed and we don't know their relationship, I don't know. Or will he pass and move on, and Laufin will stay behind and train with Richter and kind of keep Richter on the path to keeping up with it? I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go. I'm really curious to see if he passes or not next week, to see what ends up happening. But yeah, he's like, and I liked it. Richter's like, I was joking. Don't agree with me. You've got plenty of time. And that's when he's like, you're an insolent youngster. And then he's like, you mock authority. My dog mocks authority as well. He's like, you mock authority and you have no qualms mistreating the weak in order to achieve your goals. Again, kind of like Flock. And your behavior is hardly praiseworthy. But he's like, I don't feel any hatred towards you. And that's kind of how I feel with Richter. He's like, you kind of remind me of myself, because I was once probably an insolent youngster too. He's like, and now I'm an Imperial Mage. He's like, you have time. You'll get there. So quit worrying about it. Don't be discouraged. You'll be stronger, far stronger than you are today. And so then he asks her about the relationship, and she doesn't end up telling it. We don't get to find out. Mm-mm. So then Frieren shows up, and he's like, well, I was starting to feel better, but now you're here. Something that I like about Richter, though, is Richter is not afraid to admit when he was wrong about something and to kind of backtrack and correct himself. He's not afraid to do that. Because at first he shrugs off like the pieces of wood. He's like, this isn't a trash disposal service. He's kind of rude about it. He's like, I don't know what you expect me to do. And she's like, fine, if you can't do it, I'll go somewhere else. And that was like that reverse psychology, that reverse Uno card where she's like, well, then I'll just go find somebody that can fix it. And he's like, well, I didn't say I couldn't. It's like, I'm like, Frieren knows exactly what she's doing. She knows exactly what she's doing. And I love when he starts to put it back together and he's like slowly piecing it together. And what I love about it is he's like, I said it was trash, but whoever took care of this staff, it wasn't just a rotted hunk of wood that got obliterated. It was a very well-maintained staff that just felt the brunt force of Frieren's ability one time. And that's what caused it to bust apart. So I like that he kind of like not only compliments Fern in that moment, but apologized to Frieren, being like, I see why you wanted to put this back together. Whether or not he knows what it represents and the history behind the staff and Hyder giving it to Fern, he does recognize the importance of it and why she would want it put back together, which is really nice. Meanwhile, I also like that we have like the blue, the energy, the blue lights being lit. I like that little feature being explored there with the magic. And so again, Fern is like, well, Frieren doesn't understand me. And Stark's like, I don't understand you either. Stark's like, pot calling the kettle black. Let's be clear. But he does talk down, Fern's ideas that Frieren's not trying to do something good for her. And then, of course, they see Richter. And the fact that he was like, yeah, he's like, hope you enjoy the staff. Of course, Fern is not going to just run back and hug Frieren. That's not her character, right? That's not her character at all. Instead, I love just like the buildup of her getting back to the room and just seeing it on the bed. And it's so in character and perfect because it's like Frieren is not going to make a big fanfare of giving the staff back. It's not going to be like what you typically think of in a shonen where the wind's blowing, the orchestra's playing, Frieren gets down on one knee and like offers the staff back to Fern. Like it, in another series, it would have been this big fanfare, this big show. But here, it's on the bed, waiting for her to get back and see it. Frieren's already asleep. It's this unspoken but acknowledged moment of love between the two of them that doesn't need any further explanation or celebration. It's just there, constant. I'm like, and I thought for a hot second that Fern was gonna like walk over and like grab or touch Frieren's hand or hold it or like give her a little hug or something, but no, she's like it's unspoken devotion between the two of them. And then we get the flashback with Hyder talking about Frieren's struggles to understand emotions, and it may cause disagreements and difficulties, but the one good thing about it is that she'll worry and care about you just as much, even if it doesn't seem like it. Few masters are better than her. And I love that as he's saying this, she's like just this little gremlin trying to sleep. It's so cute. Oh, I love Fern's little look there, being like, I get it. I get what Hyder was trying to say. Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting because, yeah, the idea that elves just have a hard time understanding emotion, it's very true of Serie. Although Serie's a little bitter Betty sometimes. I'm like, ooh, it's very true of Serie not understanding human emotion. And Frieren's like, I don't get it, but I also recognize it. So what can we do? So yeah, so then we have the rest of the test takers. And I like that Fern is about to bring up the day before, and then she kind of stops. She's like, no, Frieren already knows. I almost wanted Fern to say thank you, but it's like, it's unspoken. They don't have to say anything. Meanwhile, we have this guy. We finally get his name. So Serie shows up, leaves her little tomb to come see Senza and the others asking why. Do you know why I came here? And Sins is just like, I like the little hairs in front of Sins' face. She's like, don't be mad at me. Please don't be mad at me. And she's not. But, I mean, I can see where Serie's coming from. Because she's like, oh, you don't have anything to say. She's like, you always remain silent in troublesome situations. Like, you don't want to explain yourself. I feel like Sinza is she would be the type of kid that when she knows she did something wrong, she just kind of like hovers in the background. Like, maybe you'll forget about me if I don't say anything. So we have Lernan, who's the one that made the golems. We found out about him. And she's like, 12 test takers have passed the second test. It's an anomaly and it's too many. I like that Jeannot is just sitting there like if it had been me doing the second test, it wouldn't have been possible. I feel like Jeannot is trying his hardest not to say I told you so to Sinza, and because Serie says, I have no problem with a test that requires the participants to work together. That's not the problem. The problem is the current, and she says, as the current first class mages lack cooperativeness, and they're all like she just calls them out in the moment being like, well, none of you all work together, so I'd love to have some mages that could do that for me. And they're like, sorry about that. Forgive us. And she's like, no, there's one among the test takers who's far too powerful. The moment she said that, I was like, she's not going to pass Frieren, which to me is such a bitter move. Like, she won't acknowledge Frieren or her view of magic as equal to Serie's. She won't do it. She's like, because of her, many have passed despite lacking the requisite strength. Being like, she helped these people pass just because they were with her. A typical third test would kill all of them. And that's kind of it's such an interesting thing because, yeah, that may be true. The third test that you all give would probably kill, the ones that didn't immediately pass. But Frieren's whole argument is like, you shouldn't even have a third test that could possibly kill them. Anybody should be able to use magic no matter what. And you shouldn't have this border crossing that requires you to be a first class mage, a term you just came up with 50 years ago, to require them to be able to cross and help others that might be in need of magic. Frieren's like, the system's kind of BS. And so, but Serie doesn't view it that way. Because, again, they both have very conflicting views of magic. Frieren believes anybody should be able to use magic at any time. Serie believes it should be only the select few who meet her criteria of worthiness should be the ones to use magic. And she's just managed to convince everybody else in the area that this system is how it needs to be. And who knows? It's been 1,000 years, even though this is the first, the conceptualization of the Continental Magic Association was 50 years ago. She's probably had dozens of other small different contingencies that have fell apart and restructured over the years. And this is just the newest iteration of that. So it's like, it just comes down to Serie doesn't believe that magic should be for anybody. So she's trying to make up for Frieren's little stint in trying to pass all these people through. And it's interesting to me. So in any case, and it almost feels like Sinza, she's like, Sinza, that's hardly what you want to kill anybody. So I'm going to try and make right with this. I don't wish to see pointless deaths either. So she gets on to Sinza, but she also says, she's like, it's all right. I'll make up for it. And I'm like, And she's like, oh, Miss Serie. She's like, there's no need to apologize. It's all Frieren's fault. Again, I'm just like, she's so bitter about Frieren. And I'm like, girl, I'm very enthused to see where Serie and Frieren's journey goes. Because I think Frieren's going to be using Fern to prove Serie wrong. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. So Lernan is the one mage we saw at the beginning. And she's like, an anomaly calls for another anomaly. And she explains that she's going to proctor the third test. It'll be a peaceful selection. Just me. I get to pick who gets to go. And so Lernan normally proctored the test. And she's like, you got any objections this time around? And he's like, no. And so what's interesting is that Lernan is very passive. He's kind of passive-aggressive like Sinza. And so he just goes with the flow. He's like, I couldn't possibly test Miss Frieren. He's like, I wouldn't know where to begin. What's interesting is he seems to tell, he's like, her mana is tremendous, equal to yours. And what does he say there? And Serie's like, oh, really? And Fouch is the other one. Did you notice? And again, I like this idea that she tries to kind of like teach a lesson to Fouch here in the second, where she's like, you don't think that there's anything wrong with Frieren, but Lernan has kind of figured out what the problem is, that she has all this mana she's suppressing. I feel like it's interesting that Fouch, he doesn't recognize any typical fluctuations, so he doesn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He's like, no living creature with mana can conceal these fluctuations. It would take an extra. He like explains it, and Serie's like, you're wrong. So, and then she goes back to explaining why he's wrong, and says that she's been doing it to deceive demons. That they're more. We figure out they're more sensitive to mana than humans. I don't know if that's been mentioned before. And she says you'd become. What's interesting is she finds the whole idea of concealing mana to be stupid. She's like, you become far more powerful devoting your efforts to training something else. And I'm like, well, it's definitely helped Frieren defeat the Demon King. What else do you want, Serie? It's just interesting how Serie kind of just is completely against everything that Frieren represents. And it's almost like she's questioning why Flom would choose an apprentice like Frieren when she chose Flom. She's like, why didn't you choose somebody more like me? Sort of situation. And Serie's disdain for Frieren is like the most calm disdain ever. And I'm like, she just doesn't like her. It's incredibly inefficient. She's like, but that inefficiency breeds weakness in others. And in a battle between experienced mages, I like the animation of her foot moving. She's like, she would kill you. Basically, she's like, basically this inefficiency makes other people underestimate her, and it leads to her downfall. And I'm like, do you realize what you're saying, Serie? You're kind of calling the pot, calling the kettle black. Because she calls Frieren relatively unskilled, and I'm like, maybe in a conventional sense, or to Serie, but it's interesting. She's like, only the Demon King, as far as I know, is able to see through it at first glance. Which, we get a little bit more crumbs. So if the Demon King can see the fluctuations, then I guess, like Frieren said, it was Himmel and Eisen and Hyder working together that enabled them all to win. And then she's like, Lernan, you saw the fluctuations. He's like, well, it was a coincidence. I just happened to see a minor fluctuation. And she's like, well, that's cute that you saw it. And the thing about it is, she calls him dependable, but then she kind of insults him. She's like, it's been half a century since you became the first-class mage of this particular magic organization. And we get to see him, the younger version of himself, which still looks a bit older. You're still the same timid boy. What's interesting is, it's almost like, she took him under her wing as a student, and walked past him saying, like, I can teach you, and took him under her wing, but because he had all this promise, but then he's not like, she's like, well, you've disappointed me after 50 years, and I'm like, what? Because she's like, you still haven't sensed my fluctuations. I'm like, girl, well, what does that say about you as the teacher? I'm like, I think that that's a good point, too, is that you've achieved this level, and yet you don't have much longer to live. And I'm like, oh my God, Serie does not mince words. Also, we find out that from the OP, it's Senza putting the cape on her. That's the moment from the OP, so I'm like, okay. I'm like, damn, she just insults him. I doubt you'll ever get the chance to fight Frieren. Not that he'd want to. Even if it's a battle you could win. Damn. And then, yeah, she just says that I shouldn't have taken on human students. You disappoint me. Ugh. I'm like, damn, girl. That's cold. He never saw the fluctuations in my mana either. So that's interesting. Interesting. I will talk about her and Fern's conversation as we go. So Frieren's like, this is how it's gonna be. She's not gonna let me pass because she's a bitter Betty and doesn't like me. She's like, I like that Frieren is not even mad. She's not even mad or sad. She's like, I know it's not gonna happen. She ain't gonna pass me. She doesn't think I'm the right type of mage. in her mind. What's interesting is that Frieren's like, in Serie's mind, her intuition's always right. And Frieren's calling it out. I love that Frieren's kind of like, this woman thinks she's right about everything. We're just going to roll with it, but we're going to use that to our advantage. I'm like, in her coaching Fern, she's like, nope, just roll with it. I think that Ubel is going to pass. I think Ubel will pass, because I think Ubel thinks that she's a first-class mage potential. She sees it. I think she thinks she's strong enough, right? My thing is, would she be a student of Serie or not? And part of me thinks that Ubel would say no. Why? Because she's going to chase Land. I don't think Land's going to pass. I think that she's going to look at Land and say no. But I think that Ubel will pass, but then she's going to spend her time still chasing after Land, who's going to train for 3 years to try to go again, and she's just going to keep following him till the end of time to try to gain his spell, his power, and then they're going to get married and have kids, and she's a first-class mage and all this jazz. I just feel like she's going to pass, but she isn't going to stick around and be Serie's student. She's going to keep following him around, or she's going to say, yes, I'll be your student, while following him around. I don't know. That's just where I think with that. As far as Methode, we talked about Denken. Methode, I could see her saying yes to Methode. And I could see Methode being a student of Serie. I could. Methode's pretty badass. And Methode also seems rational. She seems calm. She seems kind of like an all-rounder, too. I could see Methode being like, yes, I'm going to be a first-class mage. And Serie being like, you want to be my student? She goes, yes. Because she doesn't seem tied to anybody. She doesn't seem connected to anybody. Like, Ubel's kind of tied to Land. Denken's kind of tied to Laufen. I don't feel like Methode is tied to anybody. So I feel like she'll be like, okay, yes, I'll become your student. And we'll join up here maybe to replace Lernan, since he seems close to death, according to Serie. So, I don't know. I could see Methode becoming a first-class mage and sticking around with the others to be a test proctor and all that. I could see it. So, I'm going to bet that she gets in. That leaves Verbal. With Verbal, I don't know, because he is tied to Scharf and Air, but they both failed. So, do I think that Verbal would be a first-class mage? I don't know. I'm going to put him in the maybe category. I could see Verbal passing and kind of doing like a Fern and saying, no, I'm not staying with you. I'm going back home because my skills are needed there. Or I could see him not passing and training with Scharf and Air for another 3 years so that they can pass in the future. I don't know. The only ones I think are going to pass are Fern, Ubel, and Methode. I think those are the 3 that'll pass. I don't think Land will. I think Denken and Verbal are a maybe, but I don't know. And maybe Land will. I just don't. He's so quiet this season and he seems kind of doubtful. Like in the dungeon, he was doubtful that they could win several times. And Ubel had to be like, no, we're good. Trust me. And he was like, I don't know. I feel like that the doubts that he had are going to make him doubt whether he can actually be a first-class mage when he talks to Serie. So I don't know. And I feel like Land will go first and fail, and then Ubel will go, and she'll be like, and like, what's she gonna do? I don't know. I'm very curious next episode to see what we're gonna find out. So then she says Serie's intuition is always right. I haven't become the mage that Serie wishes I were. And I kind of think that Frieren acknowledges that that's never gonna happen. She's never gonna be the mage that she wishes she was. I like this atrium, this little garden that's here, and there's like the mosaic where it's the staff and everything. It looks kind of like the goddess and everything. It does remind me a lot of Howl's Moving Castle. If you've ever watched that, there's like a little garden atrium in that movie, and the keeper of it's kind of the antagonist. So make that what you will. But yeah, she's like, you failed. You can't visualize being a mage, so bye. So yeah, so then she's like, nope. So Kine fails. And then we had from there, she tells her to leave. Dunst fails. Laufen fails. Scharf fails. Air fails. And then Frieren. It blows my mind that she's just like, you're not failing because you don't think that you're good enough to be a first-class mage. But she's like, you're not the type of mage I want to acknowledge. You don't think I'd ever let you pass. And Frieren's like, am I wrong? And she's like, you know, I'll give you one chance. Tell me your favorite spell. My thing is, what spell would be the one that Serie would want to hear? Would it be Zoltrak? Would it be a spell to kill? Would it be like what? I don't think there's any spell that could have satisfied Serie. She was just doing it out of, you know, curiosity to be like, here, try to say this and see if it makes a difference. And when Frieren said the spell to create flowers, she's like, well, that's the one that Flom would have liked. And when she looks down at the flowers, like the look of discomfort on her face, like being like you're not going to make me succumb to your kindness and your compassion. She's like, no. She's like, it's useless. And Frieren's like, uh-huh. I love that Frieren's like, I saw it coming, bitch, a mile away. Okay, bye. I love that Frieren's like, well, not surprised. She's like, what did you think was going to happen? And so then she's like, you're not even going to stand your ground when I mock you. And Frieren's like, what was the point? What would be the point of me standing my ground when you mock me? She's like, I'm not going to change your mind. And she's like, no. She's like, I know that Fern is going to win, so it's fine. And then, because Serie, I think it gets under Serie's skin that she can't rattle Frieren. Frieren's not rattled by Serie at all. And I think it's because Frieren knows that she's just as strong as Serie and isn't intimidated by her. And she's like, yeah. Because in Serie, she knows, she's like, well, I mocked you, so why aren't you mad? And Frieren's like, what point is there me being mad at you? I don't want your spells. I don't need your titles. I think the whole concept of, I mean, from the get-go, when we first arrived, the concept of the exam, Frieren thought was stupid to begin with. She's like, I don't know why there's an association. I don't know why there's an exam. I don't know why this is happening. This is dumb. I'm above it. Like, you know? And so then when Serie tries to, like, hit her where it hurts, she's like, well, I find it hard to believe that a mage like you even defeated the Demon King. And Frieren's like, well, I didn't do it alone, but I had some humans helping me. And it's like, it's the era of humans. The age of the elves are no longer. I love it. She's like, if any one of us hadn't been there, we couldn't have won. And she's like, well, then, so you just had strong allies. You were lucky. And she's like, yeah, I was lucky. And then that idea that when she's talking to Himmel, which, by the way, before we even start with this whole flashback, the concept that Eisen and Hyder are like asleep and the two of them would go off and have conversations by themselves. I know why Himmel had it bad for Frieren. I really do. I get it. It all makes sense. But Himmel saying, I wanted to find you. You were the mage I was looking for. I knew that it had to be you. It was like love at first sight. Because he's like, I met you. The fact that he met her. The fact that he met her. And the fact that in that moment, she gave him directions. And he's like, I don't know if you just sensed my unease or if it was just on a whim, but you made the spell with the flowers and you showed it to me to like cheer me up. And I thought it was beautiful. And for the first time in my life, I thought that magic was beautiful. Like this concept of doing things on a whim out of kindness, Flom taking Frieren under her wing, Serie taking Flom under her wing, Frieren accepting Fern, Frieren accepting their offer to go fight the Demon King. All of this, it's like every choice that you make influences someone else to make a similar choice. So if you make a choice out of kindness, it influences someone to make a similar choice out of kindness. And then it just like, it pays itself forward. And the idea that her kindness in that moment encouraged him to look at magic a different way, but to find her knowing that she was the one he wanted to join on the quest. I was like, oh my God. Like red, a blue string of fate, right? A damn blue string of fate. Oh my God. Yeah, I get it now. She's like, it was probably just coincidence, but that luck brought us together. And Serie just kind of like looks off like, I don't get it. You know? She just doesn't get it. And Frieren's like, you know, you may intend to fail Fern as well, but I don't think you'll be able to. And I love that Frieren puts that little shred of doubt in there. She plants the seed of doubt there, being like, you're not gonna be able to fail her. You'll see. You'll see. So yeah, she's gonna exceed your expectations. The era of humans, roll credits, have arrived. So yeah, at first Serie's like, no, I don't get it. She seems ordinary. She seems pedestrian. I'm just gonna fail her. She's like, she can't move past my mana. And then she's like, what are you staring at? And Fern's like, there's a fluctuation in your power. And at that point, Serie's like, oh, you are interesting. And she just is like, be my student. And Fern's like, no. I love that Serie tries to be, because here's the thing, Serie is such a temptress. She knows the hearts of humans and their limited mortality. And she's like, be my student. You can train under me and be one of the most powerful mages. And Fern's like, that's not appealing to me. Fern is so much more like Frieren, but what's interesting is that Fern is kind of what both Serie and Frieren want, which is so interesting. She has the ability and the strength that Serie's like, oh, you. But she has the heart and the mindset that Frieren is like, oh, you. So I love that Fern is kind of like this middle ground between the two of them. But even though Serie tries to tempt her, Fern's like, I'm not here for, and she does so many subtle things, like I love the symbolism of her like running her hand over the purple clover flower, because it's purple like Fern, like her just running her hand over it, like trying to tempt her and like trying to tickle her fancy. And Fern's like, not interested. She's like, I'm not interested in going to greater heights. She's like, I just want to pass so that we can move on to get to our goal. And what's interesting is that I think that Frieren, if she hadn't have told her that it didn't matter what she said, I think she would have considered becoming Serie's student just to pass. But Frieren's like, whatever you say, she's going to let you go, because she can't deny if she fails you, then it's going to mean that Serie's intuition is wrong. But because Serie's always right, you're going to be fine. She's not going to be able to fail you. And that's why she says, I'm Frieren's student. And Serie's like, oh, she told you exactly what to say, didn't she? And then she's like, fine, you pass. Next. It's so good. It's so good. Yes. So I didn't know what to expect out of the penultimate episode. It was definitely more than what I expected, but in a good way. The connection with Himmel, mind blown. Love it. My mind is blown in the best way possible. But yeah, I'm super excited to see what's going to happen next week. That's for sure. I can't believe we're on the last episode next week. It's going to be so sad waiting for season 2, but I'm really excited when we get there. So, but I'm curious to know your thoughts down below, but I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, we'll find out who else passed and who else failed next week on Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Bye!